Well, welcome. I'm Ken Gosnell with CEO Experience, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with Hans Finzel, a leadership expert and author of the book, The Top 10 Mistakes That Leaders Make, and most recently, Millennial Boom, where he talks about the importance of the different generations in the workplace and how we can work together. So I'm delighted to have Hans with us today. I've been an admirer of him for many, many years. Since he's written these powerful and inspirational books. And so Hans, welcome today. Thank you for joining us on this video call.
You're welcome. Glad to be with you, Ken, and with everybody else that's on the call.
Thank you very much. You know, obviously we're in the midst of this crisis and this difficult moment. Can you tell me a little bit about how you look at this situation and what do you think leaders should be considering during this difficult time?
It's a time where we can be paralyzed by fear, that's for sure, even freaking out. And my heart goes out to business people who just had to put the stop button on their business, and they're worrying about how they're going to pay their employees, how they're going to pay their bills. So fear, fear is a really big thing. And how do you combat fear? Boy. That, and I certainly have my own fears. So I don't want to be trite, but I love the verse in Matthew chapter 6 where he talks about the birds that don't worry. We shouldn't worry. And I don't know why, but I live here in Colorado, and I get my hot tub every morning after I get up with my coffee. And there have been more birds out lately than normal. And they're just in my trees here, just singing up a storm. And they keep reminding me of what Jesus said, don't worry about life, whether you have enough food or drink or enough clothes to wear. Isn't life more than food, and your body more than clothing and employees and bills? Look at the birds. They don't plant or harvest or store anything, and yet your Heavenly Father feeds them. Aren't you worth more than they are? Can all your worries add a single moment to your life? So I don't think that's tried. I think ultimately we have to trust God with our future.
Oh, I think that's fantastic. You know, I think as leaders, I talk about leaders as diamonds sometimes because we look at things from multiple angles, right? And we have a lot of complexity to us. You know, in times of worry and fear, that can be even that much more enhanced because we're looking at things from multiple situations. And so I love those verses, right? That we shouldn't have to worry about tomorrow. That's one of the promises that God gives to us. So I love that reminder. Thank you for that. Hey, I know you're a leadership, I call you a leadership expert. You've been writing on leadership for many, many years, probably longer than maybe we'd like to even admit, or you'd like to admit, but I just have loved your work on leadership. Sorry. Hey guys, I did leave you unmuted for just a minute, but I will mute you guys. Just be careful as you log in. I do want to have you access to the opportunity to ask some questions in a second. You can also put those in the chat box as well. Hey, I know that leadership has been your heart passion, and you talk a lot about that you were under a bad leader at one point. Can you tell us about how leadership became such an important aspect of your life, and maybe even that bad leader experience, how that shaped who you are and how you've written over the years?
Sure. People ask me, why do you care so much about leadership? Well, it started for me working for a terrible boss who stood in the way of my hopes and dreams. I was a young man in my 30s. I had so much passion and dreams, and I went to work for a visionary entrepreneur founder, and if you've ever worked for an owner or a founder, they can be so inspiring and so successful, but they become complete control freaks. And ultimately, I lost trust in him. I lost respect for him because he wouldn't share anything with the rest of us. He held on so tightly because it was his organization. and it just crushed. In fact, I resigned and I quit, and we had to move, and it just disillusioned me so much. I said, well, if I ever become a leader, Lord, help me not to be that kind of leader. And that's when I started studying leadership, and I went and got my doctorate in the field, because I just said, if I become a leader, I don't want to be that kind of leader. I want to empower people and inspire people and release people. And so I did become a leader. And for 20 years, I ran a big international nonprofit as a CEO. And so that's kind of how my passion of leadership got started.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, one of your most significant works is, it's a book that I hand out to most CEOs that I work with, called The Top 10 Mistakes. This is the old version. You have the newer version, right?
Yeah, this is the newer version, the blue book.
That's the
And
one.
that was written kind of based on that experience. What are the 10 biggest pitfalls? You know, you can be 90% effective, but you can have these blind spots that you fall into that neutralize your leadership. And that's what happened to this person. I respected him so much. He was so gifted and talented, and yet he had this massive blind spot about micromanagement and control, and it ruined everything. So that's what the book's about, the top 10 mistakes leaders make.
Yeah, I think it's a favorite. It's actually one of my top 5 leadership books that I give to every CEO.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that very much, Ken.
Hey, when you think about today, though, in this crisis that we're in this difficult moment, I mean, all those mistakes that you mentioned in the book are really critical for us to embrace as leaders. But is there one that you would say leaders really need to be careful of right at this moment, maybe more than the others?
Well, on a negative, I would say being afraid and trying to control everything. Because on the positive, people ask me, is there a key to leadership? No, there's not one key. But if you were to ask me, what is the single most important characteristic of great leadership, I'd say humility. And I think this is a time for leaders to have a lot of humility. You're fearful, you're freaking out, and you might want to control and figure it all out by yourself. But if you take a big dose of humility, then you will have what I call the 2 big L's. The 2 most important words in a leader's vocabulary is listen and learn. You can't learn without listening. And if you don't listen, you'll never learn. And to me, it's just goes hand in glove with humility. And so what I would say in this time, admit you don't know all the answers. You know, like I'm doing a bunch of podcasts, right? I mean, a bunch of YouTube videos right now on our Millennial Boom. And boomers, especially you older leaders, you might be afraid of losing face. Oh man, I don't know how to do all this technology. I don't know how to telecommute. I don't know how to run my company through Zoom. And you can be afraid of that, and you don't want to admit it. I say, hey, admit it. You know, ask your grandkids to help you. So that's why I say in this time, listening and learning, it could be the best thing that ever happens to your business, even though right now it might seem so dismal and like it's going to kill my business. But I'm seeing, you know, I've been using Zoom ever since they came out with it for years. And I think we're teaching a lot of people the power of working from home and telecommuting and the gig economy. It's not all bad.
Right. Hey, you mentioned the podcast that you're doing right now and they can find those on your website. I do encourage them. You're doing a pretty consistent daily and weekly podcasts around the Millennial Boom. Where can they find that on your website, or where can they go to learn more information?
Well, actually, they should go to YouTube and just type in Millennial Boom. And we're giving away our Millennial Boom book for free right now for the next week. And we're doing a daily Facebook Live and YouTube videos training people on how boomers and millennials can work together. So if you just go to YouTube and either search for Hans Finzel or search for Millennial Boom, all one word, you'll find it.
I love I do want to ask you about the top 10 ways to be a great leader book in just a second, but let's talk about the Millennial Boom. because I just love that you focused in on that, and with your co-author who's in a different generation. I know you guys met as you were flying to China one time on the plane, and just kind of spoke up a conversation. Can you tell me the heart of, I know one of the struggles that a lot of CEOs have is how to address a different generation in the workplace, and especially deal with some of those younger workers. So can you tell me a little bit about the heart of that book and why you felt the need to write it?
Yeah, I met Patrick. He's got a big beard and lots covered with tattoos. I met him. He's a millennial on a flight to China. We struck up a friendship, and he told me, he said, you know, I hate baby boomers. And I said, really, why? He said, because I'm in the fruit industry in California. It's dominated by baby boomers, and they're all a bunch of jerks who hate my generation. Well, that's how the whole friendship started. And I finally taught him not all baby boomers are jerks. And we said, let's write a book together about how these generations, instead of lobbing hand grenades at each other with these stereotypes, why don't we learn the good in each of the generations and learn to thrive together? Because we're still going to have to work together for probably another decade before us boomers are all retired. So that's how the book came about. And we're trying to bridge the gap, help boomers understand millennials, help millennials understand boomers, so that we can thrive together. That's kind of what it's all about. We've had a lot of fun with it, and we've become great friends. And yeah, Millennial Boom. And the reason we titled it Millennial Boom, of course, there's a play on words, baby boom, and the explosions. I mean, there's a lot of loss of productivity because of these intergenerational conflicts in the workplace. So we're trying to address that.
Yeah, I love that. If you had one, maybe one thing that you'd love for millennials to know about the boomer generation, and then maybe vice versa, what's one thing that you think each generation should know about each other?
Not all baby boomers are technologically illiterate. Not all baby boomers are workaholics. And not all baby boomers are control freaks. Okay?
Yeah.
Because I'm very technologically savvy, and I've taught my co-author Patrick a lot about technology that he didn't know. On the other side, not all millennials, for you boomers, not all millennials are lazy. Not all millennials are feeling entitled, and not all millennials are flaky. You know, they in fact, today we're talking about swag on our video training today, and that's just about clothing. And I've learned to appreciate tattoos. The funny thing about tattoos is Patrick's got a lot of them. I have 3 sons and a daughter. They're all millennials. Of my 4 children, which one do you suppose got a bunch of tattoos?
Maybe your daughter.
None of my, right, none of my sons. My beautiful daughter, who I always envisioned walking down the aisle one day in a beautiful white wedding dress, and I did. And she had a sleeveless wedding dress covered with tattoos. And I learned to appreciate the tattoos for her generation are a self-expression. They all have a lot of meaning. It's what I call body art. You know, and I grew up thinking if you have tattoos, you're a member of the Hells Angels, right? But it's not true. So that's just, don't condemn people just because they have tattoos.
Right. Well, that's good. Hey, you know, I think
my daughter, by the way, my daughter is just an amazing human. She has 2 little boys. They live in South Africa. They're missionaries. They are doing a lot of good for the world. And so I just learned, hey, get over this tattoo thing.
Hey, that's good. That's good advice for us to, you know, I think one of the things about millennials that are really intriguing is they're really driven by purpose, and they want to know the why behind things, but they really want to know that what they're doing is significant. I think for us in Christian businesses, or those businesses that are led by Christian CEOs, we have a great opportunity to talk about a bigger purpose and a more significant meaning. Do you find that purpose piece important as you've looked at millennials as well?
It's huge. They want to make a difference. They want to make a difference now. They can see right through bureaucracy and silly rules. Uh, for example, in my office, we had dress codes, and the millennials taught me to get rid of the dress code because I realized it was a silly rule that was a holdover. Yeah, they want to make a difference, and they want to see that their work really matters, and they don't want to wait around a long time. You know, baby boomers, we often have the attitude, you know, earn your stripes, you know, pay your dues, and then I'll give you something important to do. Well, because of the shortening of attention spans, and because of the internet and instant, you know, we have Siri, you know, we can ask Siri, we can ask Alexa. You know, their generation has learned to get instant gratification of whatever they want. So they're not going to wait 5 years paying their dues before they do something important.
Mhm. I love it. I love it. We
And
might
that's
have,
why a lot of them don't want to work. I was just going to say, that's why a lot of them don't want to work for boomer companies. They want to start their own company, or they want to work for a company that's less than 10 years old, so they don't have to deal with hierarchy and bureaucracy and tradition.
yeah, that's helpful information. I tell, we've got a company, one of the companies I work with is 80 years old. And I tell every company that they should think of themselves as a startup because obviously for innovation purposes and creativity purposes, but also just what you mentioned, this millennial process, they don't really want to have to wade through all the past and they really look for something that's new
No,
and fresh.
absolutely.
You know,
And
one
you
of,
can,
go ahead.
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, what you said is very true. You can have an 80-year-old company that can be fresh and new. And to me, the key is fresh, young leadership, you know, allowing younger people to take over important positions. That's the way you rejuvenate a company.
Right,
If it's totally staffed by the good old boys, and you know, then you're never going to change the culture. But
right,
if you allow fresh young leadership to take charge, you can completely reinvent the company.
right. And to your point earlier about control, you know, giving uh, team members and millennial people, even your youngest or newest employees, a voice, I think can be extremely helpful in communicating the value that you have for every single person in the organization, but listening to those new ideas that they're bringing because they're going to tell you if you listen to them, right? Um, hey, that brings
Right, right.
one of my other favorite books that I don't have a non-favorite book that you've written, but another book that seriously, I mean, the way that you write, it's very conversational. It's easy to read. It makes a lot of sense. Obviously you point to biblical principles and a faith. So it's real life. It's real application that leaders can take it away immediately and begin to apply it. But you wrote another book called The Top 10 Ways to Be a Great Leader. Can you tell just a secret or two out of that book of what do you think? I know you use the word leadership to define what looks like to be a good leader, but can you give us some encouragement today of what leadership should look like? I love it.
Yeah, and you can find all my books, of course, on Amazon. Just type in Hans Finzel. If you can spell my name, you can find my books. And my website is hansfinzel.com. But
It's Hans
uh,
with an S and
I
Finzel with a Z, right?
with an S, Hans with an S. And I think my name is up on the screen so you can see how it's spelled. But I think one reason my books are popular is because they're very practical. I put the cookies on the lower shelf. They're not academic, and they're all born out of most of my 20, 25 years in leadership, 20 years as a international CEO. So it's real life experience. And I tell you, I've made more mistakes than anybody. Maybe that's why I have the right to teach about leadership, because you do learn through your mistakes. So the new book that I wrote not too long ago, The Top 10 Ways to Be a Great Leader, is sort of the flip side of top 10 mistakes. It's the positive. And I wrote this after 30 years in leadership, asking the question, So what really are them? If I were going to mentor a young leader, what would I tell them first what are the 10 most important things you really should pay attention to? And let me just say the first, and I do use the acrostic of the word leadership, and the L in leadership stands for listen and learn. And I always say that there's two more important words in a leader's vocabulary. I hear a ton of complaints, Ken, about terrible leadership. A lot of my YouTube videos, I've got one called 5 Signs You're a Micromanager. It's at 35,000 views. It's been one of my most popular. I thought, why is it so popular? Because so many people work for micromanagers, and the heartbreaking stories they put in their comments. And so who likes to work for a micromanager? Nobody. And what's a characteristic of a micromanager? They don't listen. They don't learn. How many times have you heard people say, my boss just won't listen? So that's why I say listening is so important. And it goes right with that humility. If you're full of yourself, if you think you have all the answers, you know better than everybody else because you're the boss, you're going to be a terrible boss because you're not going to listen and you're not going to learn from the people down on the front lines that you should be listening to. So that's the L. Another important principle, the E in leader, I won't go through all of them, but the E stands for emotional intelligence. Your EQ, and you've probably done podcasts on EQ. I love the topic of EQ because I came to realize that emotional intelligence is so much more important than intellectual IQ intelligence. And of all the people that I had to fire in my career, I had to fire some top people that I had hired. And the most painful thing is to fire people that you hire. And you have so much hope for them. And you think you did such a good job vetting them. And then they become a complete disaster and you have to fire them. And in every case, I realized it was because of their terrible EQ. It wasn't that they weren't smart or gifted or technologically, astute. They were just horrible with people skills. And that's EQ, and that's why I had to fire them. So those are a couple of the principles in my book that I think are so important.
Yeah, I think that's powerful statements there. I appreciate you sharing those and all of those the points that you make about great leaders and how do you define leadership is really critical for any of us to understand. I was just talking to Steve Newton, who's the CEO of Mission Barbecue, and he was talking about the importance of listening and learning, just an application of that. And as this virus has come in and they've had to shut most everything down, he said he's really spent a lot of time trying to learn how leaders led through difficult moments. And I thought, boy, that's really interesting that he just picked it up immediately. He knew that he needed to pivot, and whatever else he was thinking about, he needed to go learn this situation, right? And how to lead effectively in this situation.
Right.
So I thought that was important.
It's been inspiring to see how many people are pivoting. I love that word, like restaurants. I donated to a restaurant in downtown Denver this week that they're now preparing meals for frontline hospital workers and the police and the fire. And what a great, they are so busy preparing these meals for these frontline workers. And, I'm happy to donate to that cause. So they're pivoting.
Right.
And I like that. That's a powerful word, pivot. I wanted to say one more principle that I harp on a lot, and that's learning how to be a good delegator. The H in leadership stands for hands-off delegation. I find poor delegation is one of the great cardinal sins of leaders, of bad leaders. They don't know how to delegate well. And if you know how to be a good delegator, to me, delegation is another word for mentoring, for developing, right? The way you develop people to be better and develop future leaders is you learn to be a good delegator instead of a micromanager. So I love that topic.
Oh, I think that's important. I did a session not too long ago on delegation and giving authority and responsibility, and we looked at John 10, where Jesus sent his disciples out for the first time and gave them the ability and the authority to heal and to cast out demons and to preach the message. And, you know, I talked about the importance of delegation, which you're just talking about. Sometimes we'll give somebody a task, but not give them the authority to really make decisions as it relates to it. So is there something about delegation that, what would you recommend that in order to do that effectively?
Well, I think you put your hands on it. You got to give authority. And I talk about the 4 questions every follower asks. And this is the power of delegation. Number 1, what am I supposed to do? Number 2, will you let me do it? Number 3, will you help me when I need it? And number 4, will you tell me how I'm doing? Those are the 4 powerful questions that every follower asks. And if you as a leader can remember those, you know, what am I supposed to do? Well, that's clear instructions about the job. Will you let me do it? There's the authority piece. You know, can I really do it without you looking over my shoulder every second? Number 3, will you help me when I need it? And see, delegation is not like the Energizer Bunny. Ken, I actually have the problem is I trust people too much. And I kind of give them a job and set them off and say, go do it. But it's not like the Energizer Bunny where you send them off and forget about them. Will you help me when I need it? You have to stay in touch on a coaching level and a helpful, not micromanaging, but being helpful. And then the 4th thing is, will you tell me how I'm doing? And I'm a huge fan of Patrick Lencioni. And, you know, he wrote the book, 4 Signs of a Miserable Job. And one is lack of feedback. People crave to know, how am I doing? So that's my quick and dirty secrets to great delegation.
I was hoping you'd share that. I love those 4 questions. So thank you for sharing that. I think those are so helpful. When I read that and saw that, it was like a light bulb moment went on for me to think about.
Oh, good.
Effectively delegating and being there along the process. And so thank you for sharing that. Hey, we're going to take some questions from the people on the call in just a second. If you've got a question, go ahead and go into the chat box and you can put that up and I'll ask Hans those questions. I know we've talked a little bit and in your books, you mentioned faith and your faith perspective. Can you tell us a little bit about your personal faith and how that's shaped your leadership journey?
Yeah, I'm a person of faith, and I was a hippie in the 1960s. I was very lost, very rebellious, strung out on drugs, went to the University of Alabama, and I almost committed suicide. And when I was 18 years old, I was so lost and messed up. And these guys shared Christ with me and led me to Christ and to faith, and it changed my life. And so I decided I was going to make sure that my life focused on helping people find faith. And as I got into writing books on leadership, my books I would call crossover books. A lot of non-Christians love my books because there's not just a Bible study, but I do sprinkle my books with scriptures, you know, and I happen to believe Jesus was the greatest servant leader there ever was. And I teach servant leadership.
Right.
In fact, I have my most popular YouTube video is called "What is Servant Leadership Really?" And it's a talk I did at Lancaster Bible College a couple of years ago. And what is servant leadership really? A lot of people don't get it. What it is, it's humility. It's actually valuing other people as important as you are. It's not being weak and wimpy and milquetoast. It's strong, but you value other people. In fact, my definition of servant leadership is when the leader cares more about the good of the people than his or her own enrichment. That's servant leadership. So I've been very much shaped by the leadership style of Jesus and also all the leaders in the Bible. Ken, another thing about leaders you learn in the Bible is there's no perfect leaders.
That's right.
They all have their time. They are so messed up, and that gives me great hope. And don't pretend to have your act together. In fact, I'm also a huge fan of Brene Brown, and the power of vulnerability. Vulnerability is admitting, hey, I'm not perfect. I don't have it all figured out. And let's figure this out together.
Mhm.
So that's kind of the answer to that question.
No, I think, one of the things that I appreciate about the Bible is it's authentic and it's real. And you see, mistakes that the leaders make, and you also see some good decisions that leaders make. I love the idea of servant leadership. I think Jesus, of course, models that for us. I also teach steward leadership, right? That we should be stewards and not owners of our businesses. That really part of servant leadership is recognizing that we're just given a task for that day, and we need to go and maximize the best of our potential for that day as a steward of it. Hey, Jessica asked a question that I thought was really interesting as well, Hans. She said, of all the books that you've written, where would you encourage somebody to start, maybe their leadership journey, if they've never read one of your books before?
Great question. And I have written 11 books, and not all of them are great. You said all my books are great.
I haven't read
I
about
would definitely start with the top 10 mistakes leaders make. I always tell people, start with that one. It's very easy reading. It's very practical. It's been my most popular book. And I would start there. Top 10 mistakes leaders make. And I also, by the way, have these two books available in audio on audible.com. And I've read them myself. So it's my voice. If you're interested in getting them on Audible, they are available as well.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. One question we had about delegating, which I thought was appropriate at this time, we talked about delegating at work. What lessons would you teach a parent as they've got maybe quarantined with their children at home? Is there something that they could be teaching their children as it comes to delegation, or how would you encourage parents to delegate at this moment?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I learned to delegate remotely because when I was over our international nonprofit, I had people working for me in 65 countries. So I learned distance delegation and holding people accountable. But I think one thing I saw my son do, my oldest son right now, they are not homeschoolers, but everybody's a homeschooler right now, is come up with a list on Sunday night or what are we going to each try to accomplish this week? And let them help come up with the list. And then that becomes your delegation accountability tool for the week. How are you doing? That's just a simple principle, but I think it helps if the kids themselves maybe can, if they're old enough to help come up with the goals for the week, and then the parent holds them accountable for that list. And then the next week, boy, what a great learning opportunity. Was our list completely unrealistic? How did we do? What's the good? What's the bad? What can we do better this week? So that'd be one thing I would say.
I think that's extremely helpful. I love the idea of putting that list together. And that really goes back to what you were talking about effective delegation and asking those questions. What am I supposed to do? And let's decide that together as a parent child.
Yeah, let's decide it together instead of you just telling me, all right, you're going to do this and you're going to do that. Yeah.
Hey, your comment, I caught this. I like that idea of distance delegating and delegating to people, because we have a lot of remote teams and a lot of remote staff, and obviously you had remote staff all over the world. Can you tell us some secrets or how do you do distance delegating effectively?
One of the hangups that the builder generation and the boomer generation have had is they think, in order for me to hold somebody accountable, I've got to see them. They got to be in my office. I've got to hold them accountable face to face in close proximity. It's a fallacy, but it's a cultural thing that we boomers and builders kind of thought. In fact, Ken, it's interesting. How many companies are going to decide they don't need an office anymore when this thing is over? I built a beautiful office 25 years ago, 50,000 square foot international headquarters here in Littleton, Colorado. And I left that organization, and my successor, they sold it about a year ago. And at first I was heartbroken. My wife said I had a 50,000 square foot baby. I love that building. I built it. But you know what? They decided they didn't need it anymore. And I realized, you know what? Every generation has to lead as they feel led to lead. And they were right. How many companies are going to decide they don't need an office because telecommuting actually works? So that's a kind of a long answer, but don't think you have to be in close proximity to hold people accountable. You don't. You just need to meet regularly. Whether it's, again, I love Patrick Lencioni's books on death by meeting.
Mm-hmm.
I highly recommend that book because he talks about different kinds of meetings for different purposes.
Mm-hmm.
And you can have meetings electronically like we are right now. The key is to decide on your goals. The key is to decide on what are you going to get accomplished for the next week or the next quarter. And then we're going to have regular checkups to see how you're doing. And you don't have to be in the same building to do that. I've met a lot of older leaders who think, if I'm not watching you every minute, then you're not going to be doing what you're supposed to be doing. But that, I'm sorry, that mentality needs to go away. It's just not valid anymore. So that would be what I would say. Decide together on your goals. Decide together on what you have to get accountable. I was talking to a regional director for Starbucks the other day in South Carolina. He's a good friend of mine. And I said, how do you hold people accountable? Because he's roaming all over the state. He's got like 50 stores. And he said, we just decide about what results we're looking for. And then I hold them accountable for results. I don't have to be with them. I see them periodically, but that's how you hold people accountable.
Right. Yeah. I think that communication is so valuable, right? It really doesn't matter where they're located. It's just if you can continue to have that communication with them. Hey, let me ask you one other question on this distance delegating and distance learning. Culture is a big component of any company or any organization. How do you create culture when you have people that are all over the world or offices in different places?
Yeah, that's a great question. Culture does come from the top and values, and I think, and Starbucks is a good example. They have created a culture, a corporate culture that they export all over the world. So how do you do that? Well, first of all, you decide you really have to articulate what your culture is. Another company that I love is Trader Joe's, and they have a very distinct culture. And how do they get every single store to have that culture? Well, they do have their values up on the wall in their store, and they train their leadership what their values are, and they hold people accountable for those values. And you can do that 5,000 miles away. It does start with good articulation of what your values are, and then good training with new people constantly as they come in, because the new people aren't going to know those values. So that's a huge part of training.
Excellent. Hey, if you have a question, you can put it in the chat box. You can also raise your hand. I'll take you off mute so that you can ask Hans your question specifically. Your model about moving out of locations and moving remotely, I think is a pretty profound one. I think companies will be looking at that and thinking about that as they move forward. Can I show you one of my favorite things that I have in my office? So years ago, I believe in things around me that motivate me. And I had an office, a big office, just like you talked about. And so I had a little statue. I've always been motivated by statues. And it was a statue of David, as from the Old Testament, Michelangelo's art rendering of David. But it was only about
yes.
Right. And so anyway, I was surfing the internet one night, and I happened to find a statue of Moses that I thought was about the same size, but I was so excited about finding a bust of what I thought Moses was like. So I ordered it, and so I got it in the mail. And when I brought it home, so I mean, it's a full size.
Wow. Wow.
So I showed my wife.
That's big.
That is big, but I love it because Moses, I know, is one of your favorite leaders as well. So she said, hey, listen, Buster, where are you going to put that? And I said, well, I'm going to put it in my office. She said, okay, but as long as it doesn't come in my house, because I get to decide what comes in our house or not, right? And so anyway, I took it to the office, but then when I closed my office down, I had to put it in my study, so that she loved Moses, but she gave me a hard time about, about it. But hey, tell us about Moses, and why is Moses one of your favorite biblical leaders?
Yeah, I'm not trying to just promote all my books, but I guess I am. This is the book I wrote, The Top 10 Leadership Commandments, and it's all about the leadership of Moses. Why do I like top 10 lists? Because when I was a young man, I fell in love with David Letterman, and I've always was a huge Letterman fan, typical boomer. But top 10 leadership commandments. In my darkest hours of discouragement, I started reading for some reason about Moses in the Old Testament, and I realized he had more problems than I had, and he never gave up. I mean, this guy had more opposition and problems. You think about the job God gave him to do. You talk about an impossible job with a bunch of fickle followers, but he never gave up. So that's kind of why I fell in love with him. He encouraged me in my dark days of discouragement, which you will have as a leader. Hey, Mark wrote a question. Mark Cottrell, what are some good things to keep in mind when working from home to stay focused on business from personal areas? Boy, this is a huge, thank you. What a big question. What an important question. And I'm assuming, Mark, you probably have kids at home. Can you let us know if you
Yep.
do?
I've unmuted Mark. Mark can talk.
Okay.
I have one daughter. She's 23. She's down about a couple hours from me.
Oh, okay. So you don't have the problem of my children are all working at home, and my two oldest sons both have four little ones running around the house while they are trying to work from home. So you don't have that challenge of a bunch of little kids running around, but you still, I think it's important, two things: to have a place that is your dedicated workspace, so that when you go to work, I mean, instead of just working at the dining room table or the kitchen table, to say, sweetheart, I've got to go to work now. I'm going to go to my space, and try to discipline yourself in that space. My second son actually dresses like he's going to work. Now, it's not like formal, but he works in downtown Chicago, and he wears nice clothes when he went to the office. So he'll actually put on some clothes that make him feel more like he's working. Those are two tips. I think the most important thing is to come up with a schedule, and everybody is saying this for people who are working at home right now. Come up with a work schedule and come up with a place, a space that you're going to work at home, and schedule some break times and your meal times. But I think a schedule is really important, as well as a physical spot that's going to be your work spot.
I worked from home for years, and I always had an office, but it was always everyone trying to understand when you're actually working, and you know, because they see you at home and they think you're not doing anything, or they can just you can interrupt your time to go and do the laundry or something like that because you're at home.
Right. Well, Patrick and I, in the Millennial Boom book, we talk a lot about this because millennials have rewritten the workplace. We have a chapter on that, and we kind of make a joke about how his grandmother would call him and say, "Patrick, are you at work? Because I don't want to bother you if you are at work." Well, he works at home. So how do you answer that question? And that's what you're talking about. And we are all now having to learn about boundaries. Just because I'm home doesn't mean I'm not working. But millennials have been sort of what I call erasing the boundary between work and home as a whole generation. They like to work from home, and they've learned how to figure it out more than we boomers have. Great question, Mark. Thank you.
And Mark is from Canada, so we're having an international moment. Right?
Hey, shout out to our friends up north.
Yeah, thank you. Hey, we had another question from Tracy. She asked about how do you see this moment of time right now, especially in the moment of business, reshaping leaders, or maybe even reshaping relationships? What's the vision that you see coming out of this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do think a whole lot of businesses are going to learn about that they can telecommute. I think they're going to save a lot of money by not having formal offices, and they're going to realize they don't need them, and they're going to learn it's more about communication. And you mentioned that a few minutes ago, Ken, and I want to come back to the word communication because I've seen people that have an office, bosses, and all their workers are in close proximity, but they don't talk to them. They don't communicate. And so what do we learn through this process of decentralization? Communication, how important it is to communicate well as a leader. And so I think leaders are going to learn a whole new importance to staying in touch, having good, productive meetings that really do communicate. So that off the top of my head, I think that's something that's going to be that, and the whole learning. Maybe another thing leaders are going to do, they're going to realize I don't know everything and I need to learn new stuff. And probably there may be already books out there on how to manage a team by distance. There probably are, but that's going to be a whole new industry now, leading through Zoom.
Yeah, I was thinking your distance delegating might be a good book, 10 ways to distance delegate.
Yeah. Yeah, distance delegation. Delegation by distance. Yeah.
You know, we talked about Moses just a couple of seconds ago or minutes ago, and you know, this is a defeat for a lot of businesses and business leaders, CEOs. I know, you know, even though we talk about stewardship, you know, a lot of these businesses have been in existence for 20 years or 30 years. Business owners give everything that they do, they can, to make sure that the business is being successful. And this feels like a setback. Everything that they've been working for the last 5 or 10 or 15 years. Can you give us some encouragement on how to handle setbacks, or maybe lessons for Moses on that?
Yeah, get your Bible out and read the story of Moses. It's heartbreaking. And you know, we had a report last night that there were like 10% of the restaurants in Denver that have closed will never open again. You know, they're done. They're on such thin margins. They may have been new. Again, my heart breaks for the people that have recently launched businesses right before all this happened. So the Bible is filled with great teaching on discouragement. And, you know, Moses just learned to trust God and keep going, and to ultimately believe in the promises of God that, you know, he would not perish. So I don't know if I have any simple answer, except it goes back to where we started. The fear right now and freaking out is kind of a natural tendency. And I have my darkest thoughts in the middle of the night when I wake up, and I just have the most gloomy thoughts about America's whole economy is going to come to an end. We're going to be cooking out in our backyards. We're not going to have utilities anymore. The internet's going to be, you know, I can have those terribly dark thoughts in the middle of the night, and I just have to trust God and say, there's a lesson here for all of us. But I do not have a simple answer for those of you who have had to shut your business down. I'm thankful the government's trying to help, and I was on a teleconference yesterday with people from all over the world, and I know business people are having a hard time accessing the CARE Act right now, but when I compare what our country's doing to what a lot of other countries are doing, I'm thankful our government's doing what they're doing. Jason asked, are the sopapillas still great at Casa Bonita? I love the cliff diver. Yeah. My wife, when she grew up here in Denver, she went to Casa Bonita on a regular basis. But absolutely, yes, Jason, they're still as good as ever.
Hey, we've got about 10 minutes left. If you have a question, go ahead and raise your hand or submit that. Hey, Hans, one of the questions that I was thinking about, especially, is looking at this new book that you've written, with looking at the millennials. What's your hope and for the future, where it comes to future leaders? Do you see something that millennials are really excellent at where it comes to leadership that we could learn from them? And then, what do you see as the future leader? What do future leaders need to know now?
Yeah, in fact, one of the questions you asked me, right, how would I encourage business leaders to prepare today for leaders of tomorrow? I would say, number one, embrace the new generations. Instead of condemning them with your typical stereotypes, learn to appreciate the good in them. And I think that's so important, to embrace the new generations, because like it or not, they're going to take over your business. They're going to take over your organization, and you might as well mentor them. And I find most millennials really do want to be mentored, as long as it's what I would call co-mentoring. Like Patrick and I have developed this tremendous friendship, and he respects me so much because I respect him so much. And he always says, "You're not like my father. My father never respected me, but you do." So it's not like top-down mentoring, it's co-mentoring. Um, I think one of the most important jobs of a leader is to develop the leaders around you. And so that's what you need to do. You need to learn to appreciate these millennials and the iGens, which is the next generation coming up after them. See the good in them. I'll tell you one thing I did that was really helpful. I began to be obsessed in my last few years as a CEO about bringing in the millennials and making them want to work at our office. Do they like to work at your organization? Do they appreciate your leadership? Or are they just doing it because they need a paycheck? So I had a pizza lunch for everybody under 30 in my office. By the way, millennials were born between the year 1980 and the year 2000. Okay, so that generation of 20 years, and they are now in their 30s and 40s, or mid 20s to mid 40s. I asked everybody that was under 30 at the time to have pizza with me, and I asked them these three questions. And I said, "Okay, I know I'm the boss, but nothing you say will be held against you today." I call them the pizza questions. And I had those 3M Post-it notes, those big old butcher block Post-it notes. One question was, "What do you like about working here?" And you can do this exercise through Zoom. Second question, "What do you not like about working here?" Third question, how could we improve the culture and work environment? Man, that I learned some tremendous good stuff. See, because I'm asking the millennials input, because my end game was I wanted them to want to, like they like to go to Google to work and they like to go to Facebook to work. And how can I create a culture that they want to come? Well, that's where we learned to get rid of the dress code. We learned, we used to have a rule: you couldn't put anything on the walls without management's position. Kind of like your Moses figure
Right.
thing there. And we abolished those rules because I realized millennials like to decorate their cubicles and their workspace in ways that I, as a boomer, would not. But hey, you know what? If it makes them want to work and come to work, so be it. You want a big screen TV so you guys can play video games at lunch or at break? Fine, let's do it. So that's what I would recommend. Embrace the young generations. Pick their brains and ask them feedback on your culture and your management style, and how can we improve our company.
Yeah, that's helpful. And I appreciate that you're giving the book away. You're giving the Kindle version. Can you say how they get that again?
Yeah, I can throw it up here on my screen here, and hold on a minute. Yeah, I'll give them the address where they can find this. And it's going to be free from now till April 15th. So if you're watching this today, you can, there it is. You can get your free book until April 15th. And all I would ask you to do, if you wouldn't mind just sharing it on social media, posting on Facebook or Instagram or wherever, you can find it at bit.ly/milboom. and that's it's called Bookshelf. So this coupon will not work anywhere except at this URL, bit.ly/millboom, and the coupon code is Millennial Boom Free. And there are 2 L's and 2 N's in Millennial Boom Free. So it's $9.99 normally. Add it to your cart and you put the coupon code in and it'll be free. And that's a Kindle version.
Thank you for that. That's very helpful. I love disruption and, thinking about it, listening to, Jesus was the greatest disruptor of all time. He looked at things in a new and a fresh way. So I think companies have to be innovative and creative as they look and bring in the new generation. And the new generation can help really think about the future, breaking all the rules. But I guess a follow-up question I would have to that, did you find, other than the core values, were there rules that were non-negotiable, or that you said, hey, we've got to stay, this is the core of who we are, and this works in any generation? Or how did you wrestle with what was negotiable versus non-negotiable?
Well, that's a big, long answer, but I do think there are things that are non-negotiable, things like ethics and morals. We're not going to do anything immoral or unethical. And then, we actually, I took over my organization when it was 50 years old. And I always say anybody who's 50 years old's got issues. But we began to discuss what are the founding principles that our founders held to that are worth keeping. Whatever your industry is. And so we did have a few, like training, for example. We had a culture that believed in lifelong learning. That was a value that was always there, that we wanted all future people that came in, especially leadership, to be committed to lifelong learning, which meant continuing education and training. I'll just use that as one example. And so, start by looking back and say, what are the non-negotiables that are just a bedrock of our company, of our organization, that we don't want to let go? But I tell you, we threw away a lot of sacred cows. And we actually moved our offices from Chicago here to Colorado. And the number one reason I wanted to move to Colorado from Chicago is to change the corporate culture. And sometimes the best thing you can do to change a family, or to, if you ever moved after you've lived in a house for a long time, it gives you a chance to throw away a lot of stuff you really don't need anymore. And that's what happened to us. We threw a lot of cultural, historic norms away that were no longer valuable for us. So that'd be my answer.
Oh, that's helpful. That's great. Hey, we're finishing up, and I appreciate Hans for being here today. If you want more information, you can go to his website directly, hansfinzel.com, and he'll keep you informed of his newest books as they come out, newest information. Obviously, he has a YouTube channel, which he mentioned, so you can go and you can search Millennial Boom there, or his name, and his YouTube channel will come up.
Yeah, you can just go to search for Hans Finzel on YouTube, and you'll find all my, I've got lots of training videos on there.
Yeah, and I do encourage them to watch these new videos that you're doing with Patrick, as you guys are really looking at real practical. I've watched them, real great interviews or conversations that you guys are having on some real critical topics that you talk about in the book. So they're very encouraging and fun to watch. You guys are fun to watch together. Hey, Hans, I appreciate you being here today. It's been a real sense of encouragement. Do you have a last word for us, or a parting word that you might give us to think about?
Yeah, just remember the L. Do this with your finger, and think, when I think of leadership, the two most important words in a leader's vocabulary is listen and learn. And if you're a good listener and you're a good leader, a good listener and a good learner, you'll be a good leader, and people will enjoy following you.
Great. Hey, Hans, thank you very much. It's been a great encouragement.
You're very welcome. My pleasure. My pleasure.
You have a great day. I'll be talking to you soon. Thank you guys for joining us.
Thank you.
We'll be talking to you soon as well. Have a great weekend. Have a happy Good Friday and a wonderful Resurrection Sunday this Sunday. All right. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
Amen. Amen.